You can learn more about a person by watching how they treat someone who has nothing to offer them than by how they behave around a king. It was one of those evenings where the rain didn't just fall, it whispered secrets. Slick sidewalks shimmered under the soft glow of street lamps, and the wind carried the scent of wet asphalt and something else, something old. Forgotten. At precisely 7:06 p.m., the front door of Meridian. But this night, someone very different walked in. His name was Joseph Joe Ellis. Heads turned. Forks paused midair. This was Meridian. Behind the reception stand, the maitre d', a young man named Thomas, hesitated. His smile, a reflex developed from years of greeting CEOs, senators, and socialites, faltered for just a moment. Then he stepped forward. "Sir, I believe you may be looking for another location," he said quietly, glancing toward the street. "There's a shelter about 5 blocks east." Joe's smile was slow and gentle. His voice, when it came, was unexpectedly clear, rich, and smooth, like the warm drawl of an old professor. "I appreciate the suggestion," he said, "but I believe I'm exactly where I intended to be. I'd like a table. For one." That voice. It didn't match the coat, or the shoes, or the plastic bag. Thomas blinked. "I'm not sure we can accommodate you tonight. There's a strict dress code." Joe simply nodded. "I understand." It was then that Miranda Cole. She assessed the scene in a heartbeat, tatted old man at the door, customers whispering, her maitre d' frozen like a deer in headlights. Without missing a beat, she glanced at Victor. Miranda gave a single nod. That was all it took. Victor walked over slowly, putting on his best charming sneer. The kind he saved for those he deemed beneath Meridian standards. "Evening," he said, his voice loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Can I help you find the exit?" A soft chuckle rippled through the room. Joe, unbothered, looked around at the amused faces. "I'd like a table," he repeated. "And I have money to pay." Victor smirked. "I'm sure you do," he said mockingly. "Even if you manage to scrape together $20, our cheapest appetizer is $60. Now, unless you've got a winning lottery ticket in that plastic bag, I'd suggest you head back to wherever you came from." Joe reached into his coat. There was a sudden pause in the room. A few folk stiffened. The security guard near the back took a step forward. But Joe didn't pull out anything dangerous. No, just a folded envelope. From it, he retrieved 4 neatly crisp $100 bills. "Will this cover dinner?" he asked simply. Victor's smirk twitched, faltered, then snapped back into place with twice the cruelty. "Even if you could afford it, sir," he said, practically spitting the word, "this establishment has standards." Laughter bubbled louder now. A woman at a nearby table covered her nose with a linen napkin, feigning offense. Only one person didn't laugh. Melissa Gray. She stepped forward, hesitant but determined. "Sir," she said softly, "would you like me to call you a cab? It's raining pretty hard outside." Joe turned to her. He smiled. "That's kind of you, young lady. But unnecessary. I came here to dine." Miranda, finally tiring of the scene, gave a bored sigh and whispered to Victor, "Escort him out. Maybe give him yesterday's rolls for the road." Victor grabbed Joe's arm roughly, but the old man didn't resist. He simply looked at Miranda. "Miss Cole, isn't it?" he asked. Miranda's eyebrows arched. "Yes." "And you are?" "I make it my business," Joe said calmly, "to know the names of people whose businesses I visit." Victor tightened his grip. Joe didn't budge. He simply turned to Melissa. "Kindness," he said gently, "is a rare virtue in places built on appearances. Don't lose it." And with that, he let Victor push him back into the cold rain. The door closed. The laughter resumed. And inside, life went on as if nothing had happened. But outside, beneath the storm, something shifted. Something quiet. Something powerful. Because the man they just humiliated wasn't who they thought he was. And the test had only just begun. By morning, the Lexington had already forgotten him. The man with the tattered coat. The soft-spoken eyes. The ridiculous request for a table. To the staff, he was just another eccentric, maybe lonely, maybe lost, who had wandered in and somehow made it through the front door. Victor laughed about it. Miranda didn't even mention it. Melissa hadn't forgotten. She couldn't. Not after what she saw in his eyes. There was something behind them, something watching, measuring, weighing. Not with anger. Not with pride. Just with patience. Like a man who could see right through the polished silver and pressed suits, and into the truth beneath. And later that day, when she glanced across the street during a break between shifts, she saw him again. He was sitting on a bench across from the restaurant. Same coat. Same cane. But now, with a small notebook in hand. He wrote in it slowly, looking up every so often, studying the Lexington like it was a chessboard. Melissa narrowed her eyes. Was he observing the restaurant? A few minutes later, a young homeless woman walked up to him. Melissa couldn't hear what was said, but instead of brushing her off or offering loose change, the man stood and walked with her to the corner coffee shop. He opened the door for her, bought her a cup of something warm, sat across from her, and talked. Not down to her, but to her. Like a person. Like a soul worth hearing. And for the second time in 2 days, Melissa felt something stir in her chest. Back inside, the Lexington pulsed with its usual rhythm. The crystal glistened. The linen glowed. And Miranda Shaw was in rare form. She was preparing for something bigger. An opportunity. The Harrison Group, one of the most powerful investment firms in the country, was rumored to be watching. Miranda had been trying to lock in their capital for months, and if she impressed them at the upcoming dinner service, her dream of franchising the Lexington would move from sketchpad to skyline. Everything had to be perfect. The wine list? Flawless. The centerpieces? Fresh-cut peonies from a $300 an hour florist. The lighting? Dimmed to precisely 30%. And the staff? Tense. Alert. Terrified of missteps. Victor ran the floor like a general. He barked orders. Swapped servers around. Claimed the best tables for himself, just like always. Melissa ended up with the least desirable section again. She didn't complain. But the ache in her feet and the fire in her ribs said plenty. And then, just after 6:00 p.m., the door opened again. The restaurant quieted, only slightly, but just enough to notice. He was back. Joe. His coat was still old. Still threadbare. But it looked cleaner now. His shoes, still cracked, had been wiped down. And his hair, now combed neatly to one side, made him look less like a man without a home and more like a grandfather who'd seen 1,000 sunrises and still believed in kindness. Victor caught sight of him first. His face twisted into a sneer. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." He started toward the door, fast. "Didn't you get the hint, old man? You're not welcome here." Joe's voice didn't rise. Not even a little. "I believe you are required to serve any paying customer who is respectful and willing to follow the rules. I've met both criteria." Victor scoffed. "Barely." Just then, Miranda appeared again, summoned by the slight commotion. "What now?" she asked, her tone already irritated. Victor gestured to Joe. "The old guy's back. Wants to eat again." Miranda looked at Joe. And this time, for just a flicker of a second, there was something in her eyes. Recognition? No. Not quite. But discomfort. Something about the way Joe stood, calmly, silently, it unnerved her. Her voice, though controlled, cracked just a hair. "Seat him," she said, coldly. "Same table as before." far from the investor's room. Victor clenched his jaw. But he nodded. And once again, Joe was escorted to the table by the kitchen doors. Melissa spotted him the moment he sat down. She walked over, refilling his water with practiced grace. "Good evening, Mr. Ellis." Joe looked up, eyes bright. "Melissa." "A pleasure." She paused, then smiled. "Back for more punishment?" His laugh was soft, genuine. "I've found that some of life's finest lessons are served under fluorescent kitchen lights." They shared a moment. A small one. But real. This time, when Melissa returned to take his order, Joe didn't hesitate. "I'll have the chef's tasting menu again. And the wine pairing." She blinked. "The full pairing? That's a lot." "I'm aware." Victor, who had been listening nearby, stepped in abruptly. "We have a policy," he lied, "that certain guests need to pay up front." Joe reached into his inner coat pocket. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled out a small leather wallet. From it, he unfolded 4 crisp $100 bills. "Will this cover tonight's curiosity?" Victor stared at the cash. Then at Joe. Then back at the cash. Without another word, he snatched it and walked away. But behind his eyes, something cracked. As the meal began, whispers started spreading among the staff again. "Who is that guy?" He knew last night's wine was wrong. Called it out without blinking. "I saw him correct the sommelier again tonight. He said the pairing was mislabeled. Maybe he's a critic. Or a billionaire playing dress-up. I don't know, he gives off more professor vibes. Either way, that man knows things." At a nearby table, a local author was discussing poetry with a publisher. Joe listened for a moment, politely, unobtrusively, before quietly completing a line from Robert Frost that the author had half forgotten. The table fell silent. Then, intrigued, they invited Joe into the conversation. Just briefly. Just long enough for a few words. But those words left an impression. Joe didn't flaunt knowledge. He shared it. Not like a teacher. Like a friend. Back in the kitchen, Chef Darren Brooks noticed something was different again. His sous chef leaned in. "Old guy sent compliments again. Said the acid balance in your vinaigrette was, quote, delicate, playful, and anchored by restraint." Darren stared at the food in front of him. Nobody talks like that, unless they really know food. Then, he wiped his hands and walked to the service window. "I'm going out." He approached Joe's table, wiping his hands on his apron. "Sir, I just wanted to thank you for your kind words." Joe looked up and smiled warmly. "Chef Brooks, you've elevated the halibut. Not an easy fish to get right. But your sear was perfect." The crust almost whispered. Darren blinked. "You cook?" Joe didn't answer right away. But then he said, "Once upon a time. And I've eaten in places most people only dream of. But tonight, I came for something more than food." "What's that?" Darren asked. Joe's eyes drifted toward Victor, who was berating a young busboy for not polishing silverware fast enough. To see what people are really made of. Later that night, the check came. Melissa brought it with care, folding the receipt slowly. Joe signed it, then pulled something from his wallet again. Not just a tip. An envelope. "For Chef Brooks," he said. Melissa hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I'm very sure." When she opened it later in the kitchen, inside was a note. "For the flavor. For the fire. For the heart. And $500. As Joe stood to leave, Victor intercepted him. "Hope you enjoyed playing pretend again." Joe tilted his head. Then, calmly, he said, "Young man, how you treat people who can do nothing for you says everything about who you are." Victor froze. The words, simple as they were, hit harder than any raised voice ever could. And just like that, Joe was gone again. Back into the night. Into the rain. But his footsteps left ripples. And those ripples? They were only just beginning to spread. They say lightning never strikes the same place twice. But that night, it did. And this time, the Lexington felt it in its walls. The staff, though they never said it aloud, had started referring to him simply as the old man. Some with humor. Some with discomfort. Others, like Melissa, with quiet respect. But behind the scenes, questions whispered louder. Why is he really coming back? Is he scouting the place? Maybe he's with the health department. Victor laughed it all off. Please. He's nobody. A washed-up old fool with a pocketful of lucky bills. But deep down, Victor knew something was wrong. Because the third night, Joe didn't just arrive. He returned with a presence. It was in the way he walked through the front door. The way the maitre d', Thomas, stood a little straighter. The way the conversations paused, ever so slightly, at nearby tables. His clothes weren't new, but they were crisp. A clean white shirt replaced his usual tattered sweater. The overcoat was still faded, but it hung differently, like it had purpose. Like it was part of something much bigger than it seemed. He didn't need to ask for a table this time. Thomas nodded before Joe could even speak. Your usual, Mr. Ellis? Joe smiled. That'll do just fine. Thank you. Even Thomas was unsure why he'd used the man's last name. He hadn't been told it. He just knew. Victor, watching from the side, clenched his jaw. He stormed over. I'll handle him. Thomas raised an eyebrow. He requested Melissa. Victor's laugh was sharp. Yeah, well, she's not available. I'll make sure he's taken care of. He didn't wait for a reply. Just turned and strutted toward Joe's table with that same plastic smile he'd used on so many important guests. Welcome back, Victor said flatly. Table by the kitchen's being cleaned. So, you'll be in the back corner tonight. Joe glanced around the dining room. There were half a dozen open tables and better spots. But he said nothing. Very well, he replied calmly. Victor guided him to the dimmest table in the room, closest to the back exit. Joe sat down quietly. But as he did, he looked Victor straight in the eyes. And said something that made Victor pause mid-step. Tell me, does Miss Shaw know you seat customers by class? Victor blinked. Excuse me? Joe's smile never wavered. I've noticed the wealthy get seats by the windows. The middle class get placed near the kitchen. And people like me, well, they get escorted into the shadows. Victor didn't answer. He just walked away, faster than he intended. Melissa, meanwhile, had caught the whole thing. And when the coast was clear, she slipped over. Mr. Ellis, she said warmly. Would you like something to drink while you look over the menu? Joe smiled. Water is fine for now. But Melissa. Yes? You've been kind to me from the beginning. May I ask why? She paused. Honestly? You reminded me of my grandfather. Quiet. Polite. The kind of man who listened more than he spoke. And I guess. I don't know. I just believe people deserve kindness, no matter what they're wearing. Joe nodded slowly. That's a rare gift. Don't lose it. Later that night, in the kitchen, Chef Darren Brooks was working on the special for the Harrison Group's visit. But his mind wasn't on the food. He was thinking about the envelope Joe had left the night before. The $500. The note. And the way Joe spoke about sauces with more precision than some of his instructors in culinary school. There was something about him. Something unshakable. Darren turned to his sous chef. I'm going to the floor. You just went out there yesterday. I know. But I've got a feeling. Joe was halfway through his third course when Darren approached the table. Mr. Ellis. Joe looked up. Chef Brooks. I was wondering, Darren hesitated. Where did you train? Joe tilted his head. In kitchens. All over. And in life. You speak like someone who's done more than cook. Joe gave a small chuckle. I've had opportunities. Some I took. Some I let pass. But I've always believed cooking is more than food. It's care, made visible. Darren let the words settle. Then nodded. You're right. He was about to turn when Joe said softly, Chef, how is your daughter doing? Darren stopped. How do you know about Emma? Joe's voice was gentle. I listen. And I notice. She's sick, isn't she? Darren's jaw clenched. Congenital heart defect. Needs surgery. Insurance won't cover all of it. We're still figuring it out. Joe leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. Miracles happen. Especially when people least expect them. After dinner, Victor brought the check, holding it like it was a piece of garbage. But when Joe handed him the payment, he also handed him another envelope. What's this? Victor scoffed. Joe said calmly, it's not for you. It's for Chef Brooks. Please make sure he receives it. Victor's face twisted. I'll see that he gets it, he lied, slipping it into his pocket. Joe didn't flinch. Didn't argue. He just looked Victor in the eyes and said one thing. You should be careful, young man. Some lessons come late. And they cost more than you can afford. That night, after the restaurant closed, Melissa lingered near the lockers. She saw Victor counting tips in the back office. She took a deep breath, then stepped inside. Did you give Chef Brooks that envelope? Victor didn't even look up. Mind your business. It's my business if you're stealing. Victor slammed the desk. You think I'm scared of you? You're a waitress. Nothing more. You think that old man is gonna save you? Melissa didn't blink. Maybe not. But I don't think he's just some old man. Victor's smirk returned. You're delusional. She shook her head. No. I looked into him. I think he might be Joseph King. Victor laughed out loud. The billionaire philanthropist? You're insane. Melissa walked to the door. Then turned back. He's not here to eat. He's here to see who we really are. And with that, she left. Victor sat in silence. And, for the first time, he felt fear. The next morning, Melissa woke up to a new email. It was from a strange address. Just a few lines. Miss Gray. Your inquiry has been received. Mr. King suggests you observe carefully this evening. Sometimes, the most revealing moments happen under pressure. King Foundation. She stared at the screen, her heart pounding. This wasn't just a guess anymore. It was real. Joseph King Sr. was watching. Testing. Waiting. And the Lexington was about to be judged. The Lexington was buzzing. Not with joy. Not with celebration. But with tension. That kind of tight, invisible energy you feel in a room before something breaks. The kind that sinks into your skin, quiet and heavy. The restaurant's soft lighting and polished cutlery gleamed as usual, but behind the scenes, nerves frayed like wires ready to snap. Tonight was the night. The Harrison Group, the most powerful investment firm in the region, was coming for their private dinner. This wasn't just any service. This was Miranda Shaw's final shot. If tonight went well, the Lexington would become the flagship for a new line of elite restaurants. Nationwide expansion. Fortune. Fame. If it didn't, it would all come crashing down. Victor walked into Miranda's office, perfectly composed in his crisp navy suit. The private dining room is set. Chef's got the final menu. I rearranged seating so that our most photogenic guests are in view of the press. Miranda didn't look up. Good. And the old man? Victor hesitated. He made another reservation. Miranda's lips tightened. I don't want any distractions tonight. Seat him in the back. Far from the Harrison party. Out of sight. Victor nodded. Understood. But even he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That this man, this Joe, wasn't finished with them yet. Chef Darren Brooks moved with laser focus in the kitchen. Each pan sizzled on cue. Sauces reduced to velvet. Garnishes cut with surgical precision. But beneath that calm, his heart pounded. Tonight was important. Not just for the restaurant, but for Emma. She had her surgical consult tomorrow. Fully covered, somehow. A miracle. A miracle that had walked in off the street, wearing a tattered coat. Chef Brooks had thought about the envelope all night. And how Victor had promised to deliver it. But something inside told him that envelope never reached his hands. Melissa, meanwhile, was on edge. More than usual. She wasn't just worried about tips. Or shifts. Or who was taking which section. No. She knew something no one else at the Lexington truly understood yet. Joe wasn't just a man. He was a mirror. And everyone, Victor, Miranda, the staff, they were being reflected back at themselves. Tonight, she decided, if something went wrong, she wouldn't stay silent. At 6:52 p.m., the Lexington's glass doors opened. 3 black SUVs pulled up. Out stepped 2 sharply dressed men and 1 woman. Older. Graceful. Elegant. With eyes that scanned like searchlights. Margaret Harrison. C.O. Rainmaker. Kingmaker. She had arrived. Miranda swept in, her smile picture perfect. Mrs. Harrison, what an honor. We've prepared a special menu and... Margaret raised a hand, ever so slightly. Yes, I'm sure. But I'd like to meet someone first. Miranda blinked. I'm sorry? Margaret turned toward the main dining room. There's a man I saw enter this place 3 nights in a row. Old. Quiet. Dignified. I'd like to speak with him. Miranda followed her gaze, and her heart dropped. Joe. There he was. Again. Calmly seated. This time, in a spot just 2 tables over from the private dining room. He wasn't hiding anymore. Miranda's throat tightened. He's just a customer. Margaret smiled gently. Then let's treat him like one. Bring him over. Victor, watching from the other end of the room, saw it unfold. The Harrison group. Talking to him. Joe. The man he'd mocked. Pushed. Humiliated. He felt his mouth go dry. As Joe stood and walked toward the private room, people turned. Servers froze mid-step. Guests murmured. Victor looked at Melissa across the room, her expression unreadable. The whole restaurant had shifted. And they all felt it. Inside the private dining room, Joe took a seat beside Margaret Harrison. Miranda was pale. Smiling too much. Breathing too fast. I didn't realize you knew each other. Margaret chuckled. Miranda, this is Joseph King. A personal friend. And a long-standing partner of the Harrison group. Miranda's mouth parted, but no words came out. Joe turned to her, his voice quiet, but razor-sharp. 3 nights I came here. Each night, I was dismissed. Mocked. Hidden. Miranda stammered, I had no idea. That I was someone important? Joe raised an eyebrow. You only extend dignity to those you think matter. I noticed. Victor burst in, clearly rattled. Is everything all right? I can remove him if he's... Enough, Margaret said sternly. But Joe, he stood. And in one slow, measured motion, he removed his coat. Underneath was a tailored jacket. He reached into the inner pocket, pulled out a pair of silver-framed glasses. He placed them on, straightened his back. And in that moment, he didn't look poor. He didn't look like a nobody. He looked like power in human form. "Let me introduce myself properly," Joe said calmly. "Joseph King, founder and chairman of the King Foundation, CEO of King Enterprises." Silence fell like a thunderclap. Victor's voice cracked. You lied. You pretended to be." "I didn't lie," Joe interrupted. "I listened. I watched. I waited. To see how your staff would treat someone they believed couldn't tip, couldn't help, couldn't matter." He turned toward Miranda. "I was prepared to invest millions in this brand. But what I found here wasn't luxury. It was arrogance, elitism, contempt for the very people you claim to serve." Miranda's facade crumbled. "Please, let me fix it." Joe gave her a long, quiet look. Fixing it means starting over. He turned to one of his assistants, who had quietly entered. "Is it done?" "Yes, sir. As of this morning, the King Foundation has acquired a controlling 55% stake in the Lexington's parent group." Miranda's knees buckled. Victor dropped the notepad in his hands. Joe faced them both. "Victor Thompson," he said coldly, "you're terminated. Effective immediately. This," he handed an envelope to a staff member, "is 2 weeks severance. Which is more than you ever gave anyone else you fired." Victor's mouth opened, closed. No words came. "Security," Margaret said softly. 2 plainclothes officers appeared. Victor was escorted out. Joe turned to Miranda. "You'll remain on paper as a minority shareholder. But operational control is gone." Miranda's voice cracked. "You can't do this." "I already have," Joe said. "This restaurant will close for 3 months. Reopen with new leadership, new policies, and a new name." He turned to Melissa. "And Miss Gray." She looked up, stunned. "Your tuition is now fully covered. Culinary Institute. Full ride. Living expenses included." Her hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled. Joe smiled gently. "You saw me when no one else did." He turned to the staff now crowding the back. "And to the rest of you, those who showed character under pressure, you'll be invited to return. Retrained. Respected. Paid properly." He looked to Chef Brooks. "I believe your daughter has a surgery scheduled next Tuesday?" Chef Brooks nodded, eyes wide. "Good," Joe said. "She's in the hands of the best cardiac team in the country. And the bill's taken care of." And just like that, the storm passed. Joe slipped on his coat again. Not as a disguise, but as a reminder. Before leaving, he turned back one last time. To everyone who watched. To everyone who judged. To everyone who thought they knew who I was. He paused. "Remember this. The way you treat people when you think they can't do anything for you reveals everything about who you are." He walked through the restaurant one final time. This time, the silence wasn't contempt. It was reverence. A man once dismissed, now revealed. A mirror held up to them all. The sun rose differently the next morning. Maybe it was the same sun, the same sky. But to the people who had walked through the storm the night before, something had shifted. There was a silence at the Lexington. Not the elegant kind that came from soft music and hushed conversations. No, this was the silence that came after reckoning. After masks had been torn off and truths laid bare. A white sign now hung on the door, written in gold letters. Closed for restructuring, reopening soon with a new vision. And behind that door, lives were beginning again. Victor Thompson packed his bags in silence. The luxury apartment he'd rented, above his means and paid for on tips he'd skimmed from others, was no longer his. He tossed a tie into his suitcase, then paused. It had been the one he wore the night Joe revealed himself. The night Victor called him trash. The night he lost everything. He tried reaching out to colleagues across the city. Old clients. Big tippers. Restaurant owners. But the doors were closed. Tighter than ever. One manager at a luxury bistro told him flat out, "We don't want the kind of attention you bring." And so, a man who once believed himself untouchable was now sending job applications to fast food joints and airport lounges. The same ones he used to sneer at. Funny how life turns the mirror on you when you least expect it. Meanwhile, in a hospital on the east side of the city, Chef Darren Brooks sat at his daughter's bedside, gently brushing a lock of hair from her forehead. Emma was sleeping peacefully, her breathing steady. The beeping from the heart monitor was no longer a warning. It was a promise. A rhythm of life continuing. The surgery had gone perfectly. And the bill? Gone. He looked over to the window, where sunlight poured in through white curtains. His eyes welled up. For years, he'd worked late nights, skipped meals, chased every extra shift. Just for the chance to give Emma a future. And it had been a man in worn shoes and a plastic bag who made it possible. No contract. No pitch. Just quiet observation. And kindness. That morning, a nurse knocked gently on the door. She held out an envelope. "From Mr. King's Foundation," she said with a smile. Inside was a letter and a deed. To a small restaurant space near Riverfront Park. Fully paid. Fully outfitted. Named after Emma. And at the bottom, in flowing ink. Real food. Real people. Real community. We believe in your vision. Bring it to life. Joseph King. On the other side of the city, Melissa sat at her tiny kitchen table, staring at her acceptance letter. Only this time, the letter was framed. Right beside it, a thick folder from the King Foundation. Tuition, covered. Housing, provided. Uniforms, books, knives, all there. But more than the money was the message. Someone had seen her. Not just as a waitress. Not just as a name on a schedule. But as a person, with dreams, talents, and heart. She packed her backpack for her first day at the Culinary Institute. And before leaving, she pinned something above her door. It was a quote. From the night everything changed. The way you treat people when you think they can't do anything for you reveals everything about who you are. She read it once. Then again. And walked out with her chin high and her spirit whole. And what of Miranda Shaw? The woman who built the Lexington from nothing. Then nearly lost it all chasing everything. For days after the reveal, she stayed away. Too ashamed. Too angry. Too confused. But eventually, a letter arrived for her too. Not from a lawyer. Not from an investor. From Joseph King himself. It was handwritten. Short. Direct. Gentle. Miranda. You built something beautiful. But you forgot to build it on compassion. I believe in redemption. The question is, do you? JK. Attached was a job offer. Not to run the Lexington, but to consult for the King Foundation's new culinary outreach initiative. Helping local food entrepreneurs in underserved neighborhoods launch sustainable, quality restaurants with real values. At first, she scoffed. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the Lexington. But then, she walked into one of the pilot cafes in the South Side and saw a single mom, once homeless, now running a clean, bustling kitchen. Saw young kids from the neighborhood learning knife skills. Saw elderly guests being served like royalty. And for the first time in years, she saw meaning in food again. 6 months passed. Spring came. And the Lexington? It reopened under a new name. King's table. No chandeliers. No velvet ropes. Still elegant. Still refined. But warmer now. Kinder. There was no best table in the house, because everyone mattered. You could order a $65 duck confit. Or a $12 seasonal plate from the community menu. Both made with the same care. Both served with the same smile. Every Thursday, the restaurant transformed into a community kitchen, offering full meals, no questions asked. And the staff? They were paid fairly. Trained thoroughly. Respected deeply. And at the heart of it all, Chef Darren Brooks. Behind the line, teaching. Leading. Smiling. Beside him, every weekend, Melissa. Interning. Growing. Thriving. One evening, at a soft-lit preview dinner, Joseph King himself walked in. Not in tattered clothes this time. But still simple. Still unassuming. He greeted the new staff by name. He paused in the kitchen to taste a cherry-braised short rib and nodded in silent approval. And then, he sat at a small table by the window. Alone. No entourage. No press. Just a man at peace. Melissa walked by and placed a single red carnation in a tiny vase at his table. "Welcome home," she whispered. He smiled. "It's not mine," he said. "It belongs to all of you now." As the evening wound down, Joseph slipped out quietly. Later, someone found a note folded neatly on his plate. It read, "True wealth isn't measured by what you keep. It's revealed by what you give. Keep giving. Keep seeing. Keep believing. Because the world doesn't need more rich people. It needs more good ones." In a small corner of the city, an elderly man in a plain sweater sat on a park bench, feeding crumbs to the birds. Beside him, a young boy asked, "Mister, why do you dress like that?" Joseph King smiled. "Because sometimes, when you look ordinary, you get to see who people really are." And he tossed another crumb to the wind. Letting the world show itself, just as it is. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a comment. Because sometimes, the richest souls wear the poorest clothes. And the most powerful lessons come from the quietest voices.